The sun burned over the Kenyan desert horizon, as if the sky itself were on fire. A man stood there alone, tied to a post, surrounded only by sand, wind, and silence. His captors had left him there to die, without water, without food, without hope. But what they didn't know was that in that same desert, in the middle of the heat and the loneliness, something impossible was about to happen. A story that would defy logic, shake the faith of unbelievers, and prove once again that when everything seems lost, God still has a plan. Once again, welcome to the channel where the miracle begins, because every sincere prayer is the beginning of a miracle. Subscribe to the channel now and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any real testimony. My name is Daniel Omonde, and until that day I believed I knew the meaning of the word faith, but nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to live. The wind blew hot, lifting the sand that cut my face like tiny blades. The desert seemed endless, just a golden immensity where the sun beat down on the ground and made the air tremble. It was there, in the middle of nowhere, that my faith would be tested. I had spent months traveling through small villages in the interior of Kenya, carrying the message of the gospel. I spoke about forgiveness, hope, and the love of a God who never abandons anyone. Some listened to me with joy, others with anger. In certain regions, preaching about Jesus was still seen as provocation, and that morning, that provocation cost me dearly. I remember the sound of the engines when the pickup truck stopped on the dirt road. 4 men got out, their faces covered with cloths, their eyes hard as stone. They said I was bringing confusion to the village. Before I could answer, I felt a blow on my back. I fell to my knees. The taste of blood and dust filled my mouth. "Let's see if your God shows up now," one of them said as he tied my hands with a thick rope. I was thrown into the truck bed and taken for hours until the sounds of civilization disappeared. When the engine finally stopped, silence took over. The desert stretched out before me like a sea of fire. They pushed me out, and I fell face down on the hot sand. The heat burned my skin, but what hurt the most was the uncertainty. Was this the end? I looked around, nothing but wind and horizon. One of them laughed and pointed to the sky. "If your God is real, ask him to get you out of here." They drove away, and the sound of the engine faded into the distance. I stayed there tied up, alone, my throat dry and my heart pounding. For a moment, I thought the silence was God's answer, but I was wrong. That silence was only the prelude to the miracle. Time passed slowly. The sun was already high when I realized my skin was starting to burn. The rope squeezed my wrists so tight that the blood could barely circulate. Sweat ran down my face and mixed with the sand. Every breath was an effort. The desert doesn't forgive anyone. But even there, I didn't feel anger. I felt fear, yes, fear of what was coming, fear of dying alone. But alongside the fear, something greater began to rise inside me. The certainty that God was still with me. I closed my eyes and started to pray, not asking for rescue, but saying, "Lord, if this is my last hour, let it belong to you. And if there is still a purpose for me, show them, Father, that you don't forget your children." The wind changed. Suddenly, a shadow passed over me. I opened my eyes, thinking it was a vulture, but it was just a small cloud covering the sun for a few moments. Just enough time for me to breathe and remember, I'm still alive. Deep down, I knew it wasn't a coincidence. Even in the silence, God was still speaking. And in that loneliness, my faith stopped being just a speech and became life. I thought of my mother, of the people in the little church in Garissa where I started preaching. I remembered the hymns sung under a thatched roof and the simple prayers we used to say, and it was there, tied up in the middle of nowhere, that I understood. Real faith is not what we say when everything is fine. It's what we choose to believe when everything seems lost. The heat began to ease, the sky turned shades of red and gold, and the silence seemed to completely surround me. Then I heard something in the distance, the sound of laughter. They were coming back, maybe to check if I was still breathing, maybe to mock my despair. I closed my eyes once more and whispered, "Even if I die here, Lord, let my life be a testimony." And if you were in my place, alone, tied up, watching the sun disappear over the horizon, would you still be able to trust? Tell me in the comments what you would do if your faith were tested like that. And before we continue this story, I want to give you a special invitation. If you believe that faith is strengthened in times of trial, I prepared something that can help you walk with more firmness. It's the eBook, 33 Prayers for Difficult Times. A journey of practical faith, with prayers and daily challenges to renew your relationship with God. For less than 10 cents a day, you invest in your spiritual life and also help this channel keep bringing real stories that strengthen faith. The link is in the description and also in the first pinned comment. May God bless you for every seed you plant with love. The sun disappeared behind the dunes, and the night brought with it something that would change everything. Night fell like a heavy veil over the desert. The heat of the day gave way to a biting cold, and the wind now sounded like a distant lament. I was trembling, my body hurt, my lips were cracked, and my throat burned from so much thirst. I looked up at the sky. Thousands of stars shone above me, so close and yet untouchable. They seemed to watch what was happening down below, as if even heaven were waiting for the outcome of that night. I tried to remember every Bible verse I had ever preached. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. I repeated those words like someone grabbing onto a board in the middle of a shipwreck. But my mind fought against the exhaustion. Every sound in the desert felt like a sign. The distant howl of a jackal, the rustling of dry grass, the brushing of something moving nearby. I closed my eyes and imagined my mother's face. The simple mud house in Isiolo, the smell of burning firewood, the sound of children laughing before evening prayer. There, life was simple. Here, every second was a battle. Tears ran down my face and I said, almost without a voice, "Lord, I'm not asking you to take me out of here. I just ask you to let me feel your presence one last time." Silence answered first, but then something different came. A low, deep sound, like the ground itself was breathing. A distant roar. My heart raced. For a moment I thought it was the end. A lion, maybe drawn by the smell of blood, was prowling nearby. In the Kenyan desert, that usually meant only one thing: death. But there was something strange about that sound. It wasn't the roar of a hunting animal. It was deeper, more solemn, as if the desert itself were bowing before something sacred. I closed my eyes and prayed again. "Lord, if this is your way of taking me, then receive me with mercy. But if there is still a purpose, then show me your power." The wind blew stronger. The sand rose like a golden curtain, and in the middle of that gust, I felt a presence. Not human, not hostile, but alive. Something was moving in the shadows. The sounds became clearer, steady, measured footsteps, and then the roar came again, closer, stronger, and every fiber of my body trembled. I didn't know it yet, but the miracle was already on its way. The moon rose over the dunes like a silver beam cutting through the sky. The wind had died down, even the crickets went quiet. The silence was now so thick I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my chest. And then I saw it. Between the shadows of the dry grass, two eyes shone. Golden, deep, alert. A massive shape moved slowly, almost without a sound, as if the earth itself were carrying it. The moonlight touched its mane and made it shine like ancient, majestic gold. It was a lion, the king of the Kenyan desert, the predator that can make even the bravest fall to their knees in fear. My whole body froze. I tried to move, but the ropes held me. The air vanished from my lungs. I could taste fear in my mouth. All I could think was, so this is how it ends. The animal came closer with slow, confident steps. Each paw sank into the sand and made the ground vibrate. The sound of its breathing was low and steady, and the nearer it came, the less I understood what I was seeing. Those eyes did not show hunger. There was no rage. There was something different there, a supernatural calm. The distance between us closed until I could feel the heat of its body. It stopped right in front of me, so close I could see the vapor coming from its nostrils and the shine of its mane moving with the light dawn breeze. For a few seconds, time seemed to stop. It was as if the desert itself was waiting to see what would happen next. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Lord, if it is your will, let it be done." And then the impossible began. I felt a tug on my wrist. I opened my eyes. The lion had lowered its head. Its fangs, instead of sinking into my flesh, were gripping the ropes. It pulled hard, but with care, like someone fulfilling a mission. The sound of the fibers snapping echoed loud in the night, once, twice, 3 times, until the rope broke. My arms fell free, the pain throbbed, but my heart was beating stronger than ever. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The lion took a step back and looked at me again. For a moment, I felt that God was there, not speaking with words, but through those wild, calm eyes. Then it roared, a deep, powerful roar that seemed to shake the air itself. But it was not a roar of threat. It sounded like an announcement. Something was being declared in that desert. In that instant, I understood that the lion hadn't come to kill. It had come to guard. For a few seconds, everything stood still. The lion remained in front of me, firm, its gaze fixed on the horizon as if waiting for something. The desert dust rose slowly, dancing around it under the moonlight. That animal, which could have ripped me apart in seconds, now looked like a guardian. My hands trembled. I ran my fingers over my wrists, marked by the broken rope. The skin was wounded, but my heart, for the first time, felt at peace. But the lion didn't move. It only lifted its head, ears alert, its muscles tensed, not like an animal about to attack, but like a soldier waiting for his commander's order. The footsteps drew closer. I could hear one of them laughing with contempt. "Maybe the vultures already did the job for us." Another replied, "If he's still alive, we'll finish what we started." Their voices echoed across the plain. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. "Lord, I can't fight, but you can." The lion took a step forward. Its body was pure strength and majesty. Its mane flowed in the night breeze, and every movement seemed charged with purpose. Then it stopped, looked at me one more time, and in that look, I saw something I will never forget. Obedience. As if the Creator himself had said, "Protect him." The voices grew closer. The men's shadows began to appear between the dunes. They stopped abruptly when they saw what was in front of them. One of the men shouted, "A lion! Run!" But the bravest of them raised his rifle, trying to aim. Before he could pull the trigger, the lion roared. It wasn't a common roar. It was like the ground itself shook, as if the desert had heard a call from heaven. The sound ripped through the air and made the men fall to their knees, covering their ears. Their screams mixed with the wind, and one by one they started to run, leaving their weapons and their courage behind. The last one to flee looked back and saw something that made him run like never before. The lion, standing still, just watching, as if marking the line between life and death. I, on my knees, couldn't hold back the tears. My voice came out shaky but firm. "You are the God who still answers in the desert. You are the same yesterday, today, and forever." Then it started to move away. Each step lifted golden dust, and for a moment it seemed like the moon itself was shining on him. I stayed there, face down on the sand, knowing I had just witnessed the impossible. But the miracle wasn't finished yet. God still had something to show. The wind blew hard again, lifting the sand in golden whirlwinds. The sky seemed to breathe with me. Each beat of my heart blended with the distant roar echoing across the plain. The lion stopped, looked back, and stared at me with calm, almost human eyes. And then, from the shadows, I heard the voices again. The men had returned. I could see their silhouettes cut against the horizon, 3, maybe 4 of them, armed, their flashlights trembling in their hands. They looked uncertain, torn between fear and hatred. One of them shouted, "There he is! The preacher is still alive!" My whole body shook. There was nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. But the lion moved before I could react. He took one step forward, then another, and positioned himself between me and the men. He stood still, immense, his mane blowing in the night wind. It was like a living wall had risen up in front of me. That scene I will never forget. The men hesitated. One of them lifted his rifle, trying to aim, but as his finger prepared to pull the trigger, the lion raised his head and roared. It wasn't a normal sound. It was as if heaven itself had spoken. The ground vibrated under my knees. The air seemed to bend. It was a roar that did not come only from the throat of an animal. It came from an invisible throne. The weapons fell. The men screamed, fell to their knees, then ran in desperation, tripping over each other. Dust swallowed them as they fled, and in the middle of all that chaos, the lion remained standing, calm, firm, like a soldier who had just fulfilled the king's orders. I collapsed to my knees, tears streamed down uncontrollably. My voice came out in sobs. "Lord, I saw it. I saw your power with my own eyes." The lion slowly turned his head and looked at me one last time. There was no savagery in that look. There was purpose. It was as if he said, "It is done." Then he walked away, silently, leaving broad paw prints in the moonlit sand. The wind blew again, and each step seemed to dissolve into the silver glow of the desert, until he disappeared completely, as if he had gone back to the place he came from. I stayed there alone, breathing between sobs, my body weak but my soul on fire. And in that moment I realized God hadn't just spared me from death. He had shown me that even the beasts bow before his command. The roar echoed inside me like a living memory. And when I finally stood up, I looked at the sky and said, "You are here, and you have been here the whole time." The desert felt different. The fear was gone. The air was full of peace. The place that had just been marked by horror was now holy ground. The sun rose slowly over the desert, painting the sky in orange and gold. That light touched the sand like a new mantle, and I was still there on my knees, trying to understand what had happened. The rope marks were still on my wrists, but I no longer felt pain. My body was exhausted, but inside me there was a strength I had never known before. I started walking without knowing where to go. My feet sank into the hot sand, and each step felt like an act of faith. The desert that had once been a prison had now become an altar, and I could only repeat one phrase: "The Lord is good. His love endures forever." After hours of walking, I saw something in the distance. A small hut made of mud and straw next to a tiny field. My eyes were burning, my vision was blurry, but I kept going. When I arrived, a woman stepped out the door and looked at me, frightened. Maybe she thought I was a wanderer or a ghost. I could barely speak. I just raised my hands and whispered, "Water." She ran to me and gave me some water in a clay bowl. As I drank, a boy appeared behind her, about 10 years old, and asked, "Mom, what happened to him?" She answered softly, "It looks like God saved him from something terrible." I stayed there for 2 days, regaining my strength. When I told them what had happened, the woman opened her eyes wide in disbelief. But the curious boy asked, "Did the lion really obey you?" And I said, "Not me, son. He obeyed the one who created the heavens, the earth, and also the lions." On the third day, I decided to go back to my village in Garissa. The walk was long, but my heart was light. When I arrived, people stopped what they were doing. The children stared at me, surprised. The men put down their tools, and the women began to murmur, "It's him, the man who was taken." Some stepped back, others came closer cautiously. One of the elders, the one who had agreed to my arrest, stood up and asked, "Daniel, how are you still alive?" I stayed quiet for a moment. Then I answered, "Because God still has power. Because when men abandoned me, He sent a lion to guard me." The murmuring turned to amazement. Some laughed, thinking it was impossible. Others cried. But there was a group that knelt on the ground and began to pray. In that moment, I understood that the miracle hadn't happened only for me. God had allowed all of it to reach many hearts. The days that followed were filled with visits. People from nearby villages came to hear what I had to say. Men and women brought their children, the sick, the afflicted, and asked me to pray for them. I told everyone the lion was just the instrument. Salvation comes from the Lord. That night I sat in front of the fire and looked up at the sky. The stars were as bright as they had been on the night I thought it was my end. But now, each star seemed like a living reminder of God's faithfulness. And there, in front of the fire, I made a vow. "Lord, my life is yours now. Use me wherever you want. Let my story reach those who no longer believe that you still do miracles." The flame flickered in front of me, and I knew this was just the beginning. The weeks went by, but the miracle never left the memory of those who lived in that region. Some still doubted, others were converted, but everyone, in one way or another, felt the echo of that roar across time. The lion was gone, but the testimony remained. One morning I went back to the same spot in the desert where everything had happened. The rope marks were still carved into the post. The sand was the same. The wind was the same, but I was no longer the same man. I knelt there and cried, not from pain, but from gratitude, because I understood that the true miracle was not just God sending a lion to save me. The true miracle was Him turning my fear into faith and my pain into purpose. I opened my Bible and read the verse that has been my daily reminder ever since, Psalm 34:7. "The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear Him, and He delivers them." In that desert, the angel of the Lord didn't have wings, he had a mane, and he roared to prove that God still fights for those who love Him. How many times have you felt abandoned, tied up by situations that seem to have no way out? How many times did you think God was silent, when in reality He was already sending the lion that would set you free? Daniel thought it was the end, but it was the beginning of a new calling. The same can happen to you. The pain that today feels unbearable may be the very setting where God will show the power of His presence. He does not change. He still sends deliverance, still opens paths, and still turns deserts into altars. So I ask you, in what area of your life have you felt abandoned? Could it be that God is just about to send your lion too? Think about it, because sometimes what sounds like a roar of threat is actually the sound of salvation drawing near. If you also believe in God's power in the midst of affliction, pray with me now. Lord my God, thank you, because your power has no limits. Thank you because even when the world ties us up with fear, doubt, or pain, you are still the God who sets us free. I pray now for each person watching this video, may you send deliverance over them, whether as a lion of courage, of faith, or of hope. Renew, Lord, tired hearts, and make the impossible happen once again. In Jesus' name, amen. If this story spoke to your heart, leave your comment and share what touched you the most. Like this video and subscribe to the channel where the miracle begins, because here, every day, we remind the world that God still does the impossible. And before you go, I want to leave a special gift for you, the eBook 33 Prayers for Difficult Times. A journey of practical faith with prayers and daily challenges that will strengthen your walk with God. This ebook is a guide that can help anyone live a deeper and more real relationship with the Lord. For less than 10 cents a day, you invest in your spiritual life and also help the channel keep producing stories that inspire and transform lives. The link is in the description and also in the first pinned comment. Now tell me, do you believe that God still sends lions to defend us? Write it in the comments and let your faith roar loud too, because here, where the miracle begins, faith never ends. A big hug and see you in our next encounter.